The rusted hull of the freighter groaned beneath their boots as Xiomara and Kira navigated its labyrinthine corridors. Shadows clung to every corner, cast by flickering emergency lights that sputtered like dying embers. The oppressive silence was broken only by the hiss of leaking coolant and the thud of their footsteps on the metal deck. Their destination, the cramped engineering bay where the ship's aging AI core resided, felt miles away. Just days ago, this vessel had been a beacon of hope, ferrying them from their dying planet towards the glittering promise of the Conclave. Now it was a hulking tomb adrift in the vast emptiness of the Catalyst Nebula. "Can you feel it?" Kira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The ship, it's afraid." Xiomara didn't reply immediately. Fear wasn't something she readily acknowledged, not when hope felt so fragile. But she understood what Kira meant. A palpable dread hung in the metallic air, as palpable as the stench of burnt circuitry that permeated their every breath. "It's just malfunctioning," Xiomara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Shade mentioned a loose wire, something about a surge. Kira wasn't convinced. Her gaze drifted to the warning lights blinking like frantic eyes on the control panel ahead. "Maybe Shade didn't tell us everything." Before Xiomara could respond, Kira stumbled over a tangle of exposed wires, nearly tripping onto the grimy floor. A jolt echoed through the ship, throwing them off balance. A chorus of klaxons joined the incessant hiss. "By the stars!" Xiomara gasped, grabbing Kira's arm to steady her. Then the silence returned, heavier and more oppressive than before. They pressed on, urgency gnawing at their bellies. They had to reach the AI core. It held not only the key to restarting their engines, but also a faint glimmer of hope. Shade's supposed connection to the Conclave, a dangerous beacon in an even more dangerous sea of stars. The rhythmic thrumming of machinery accompanied their trek as they pushed deeper into the ship's bowels. The stench of burnt oil thickened with each step, clinging to their clothes like a shroud. "Remember Shade's schematics?" Kira asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "He said the AI core was linked to the navigation system. Maybe we can use that to jump-start the engines." Xiomara nodded absently, squinting at the flashing lights above her head like scattered stars in a bruised sky. Her mind raced, trying to piece together Shade's cryptic messages about the Conclave and the true purpose of their mission. A knot of unease tightened in her chest. Shade had always seemed more interested in uncovering secrets than solving problems. "And what about this connection he mentioned?" Kira pressed, catching Xiomara's frown. "To the Conclave." Xiomara hesitated, pulling out a worn datapad from her pocket. Its screen flickered weakly, displaying fragmented code and garbled messages left behind by Shade. His cryptic ramblings had once seemed like brilliant insights, but now they felt chillingly ominous. "He wouldn't say much about it," Xiomara admitted, tracing through the lines of code. "Talked about whispers on dark nets, hidden agendas, and something called the conduit." Kira's brow furrowed. "The conduit? What's that?" Xiomara shrugged. Her fingers danced across the datapad's interface, sifting through the digital debris left behind by Shade. A flicker of movement in the corner of her screen caught her eye. "Something here," she murmured, her voice hushed with a mixture of fear and anticipation. A hidden message, encoded within his code. Xiomara traced a finger across the holographic display, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's encrypted, layered with several different algorithms," she muttered. Shade favored complexity. Kira leaned closer, peering at the shifting code. "Any chance you know how to break it?" Xiomara let out a dry chuckle. If it were that simple. Her gaze snagged on a fragment of text amidst the tangled symbols. "Wait, I've seen this before." She tapped several more times, her fingers flying across the pad's surface. The encrypted message shimmered and fragmented before reforming into a single line. "They observe from the edges." "What does it mean?" Kira asked, her voice urgent. Xiomara pondered for a moment, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "It could be referring to someone watching us," she said finally, "or something observing from afar." Kira shuddered. "But who would want to watch us now?" Xiomara didn't have an answer. The weight of Shade's cryptic message pressed down on her, mingling with the unsettling dread that had clung to them since this journey began. "He always said there were bigger forces at play," Kira added, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe." She trailed off, her eyes widening in sudden realization. Maybe he wasn't just trying to contact the Conclave. Xiomara turned, meeting Kira's gaze. What do you mean? Kira took a deep breath, her expression serious. Maybe he was trying to warn us about them. A shiver ran down her spine. About whoever or whatever is watching us from the edges. He always talked about things beyond our understanding, Kira said, her voice catching in her throat. Like the catalyst nebula itself, he swore there were currents within those storms that defied physics. Xiomara nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the warning lights that pulsed ominously above them. Shade's obsession with the nebula's mysteries had always been unsettling. Now it felt like a dangerous echo of his final message. And what if, Kira continued, pushing on with a newfound urgency, what if this conclave, they're connected to the nebula somehow, to these currents Shade spoke of? Xiomara felt a chill run down her spine. He mentioned something about the conduit, a gateway perhaps, hidden within the chaotic energy of the nebula. She traced a finger across her datapad, pulling up Shade's cryptic notes on the subject. According to him, it wasn't just a place but an idea, a force that the Conclave could manipulate. Kira asked, stepping closer. Xiomara's eyes widened as she examined the faded ink on Shade's notes, strange symbols and equations interspersed with words half erased by time and fear. A cold realization washed over her. What if they use these currents for surveillance, or worse? She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Kira's eyes narrowed, gripping her pulse rifle tighter. He said that the Conclave valued secrecy above all else, she murmured. They manipulate information, control narratives. What if this watching started long before we even set foot on this ship? Xiomara felt a surge of anger mixed with helplessness. Shade had been so focused on unearthing their secrets, warning them about the dangers lurking beyond the known, but he hadn't foreseen his warnings leading to this. We need to find evidence, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Proof that they're behind this surveillance, and if we can, unravel the conduit before it's too late. She looked into Kira's determined eyes. They may have been watching us, but now we turn the tables. A quiet determination hung between them as they stared at the flickering lights in the dimly lit corridors of the derelict ship. Their mission had become more than just a search for answers. It was about survival against an unseen enemy with terrifying power. They had to find concrete evidence quickly before the Conclave's watchful eyes silenced them forever. Kira's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the tangled web of wires and sparking circuits that constituted their surroundings. Shade always said this ship was a labyrinth, she muttered, her fingers trailing along a corroded conduit. But with every turn, it seems to get even more complicated. Xiomara frowned, tracing the worn inscription on a nearby control panel. A faint hum resonated from within, the sound muffled by the ship's decaying hull. Perhaps he wanted it that way, she said, her voice low. To make us think we were lost, hopelessly navigating his riddles? Kira's tone was skeptical, tinged with a hint of frustration. Xiomara gestured towards a blinking panel across the room. Unless finding the conduit is part of the labyrinth itself, maybe we need to decipher its geometry before we even begin to understand its purpose. Kira followed her gaze. But how do we translate Shade's observations into something tangible? He scribbled more theories than solutions, she pointed out, frustration lacing her voice. Xiomara tapped the datapad against her palm, recalling Shade's last transmission, a panicked whisper about escaping pursuers before abruptly cutting off mid-sentence. He was desperate, Xiomara said, her eyes hardening with resolve. If he knew something crucial about the Conclave, it has to be buried somewhere deep in this ship. And what about that message? Kira's gaze lingered on the datapad screen. They observed from the edges. He thought they were watching us, but do we know why? And who even is they? Xiomara felt a chill creep up her spine despite the ship's stifling heat. It wasn't just paranoia. Shade had been acutely aware of unseen forces at play throughout his research. He believed the Conclave craved control, Xiomara said, her voice low and deliberate. Information is power. Maybe they're trying to find whatever it is we discovered in the nebula. Or, Kira's voice dropped to a whisper, what about us? Maybe they want what we represent, survivors, witnesses. Xiomara looked at Kira, sharing her apprehension. He was convinced there were those who feared the truth, who would do anything to keep it buried, she said, tracing the faded symbols scrawled on Shade's notes with a gloved finger. Then we need to be smarter than them, Kira said firmly, clenching her pulse rifle. Find what Shade was looking for, expose the Conclave, show them that their secrets will unravel. Xiomara met her gaze with a nod of determination. They had lost so much already, but this, unveiling the truth, defying whoever controlled these unseen shadows, was more than just survival. It was about honoring both Shade's legacy and their own commitment to justice. The darkness within the abandoned ship pressed upon them, a stark reminder of the perils they faced, yet their resolve remained unwavering. This derelict vessel had become a battlefield between light and shadow, and they wouldn't back down. Kira ran a gloved hand along the ship's weathered spine. This hull feels like an old man's skin, brittle, cracked, hiding something beneath, she muttered. Xiomara traced her fingertip across the control panel, its surface cool and strangely smooth. Shade left cryptic notes about resonant frequencies and harnessing the nebula's heartbeat. He was always convinced this ship was capable of more than just traversing space. She paused, her brow furrowed in concentration. This engine room, it's still humming with a faint energy signature, like a giant heart struggling to beat. Kira nodded, her pulse rifle gripped firmly in her hand. Maybe Shade's journals are the key. If we can decipher those equations, unlock this ship's true potential. She trailed off, scanning their surroundings for any sign of concealed machinery or access panels. But why? Xiomara asked, running a finger down a row of blinking lights. Their flickering pattern was irregular, almost like a dying pulse. If the Conclave wanted to silence him, wouldn't they have simply destroyed his research? Why go through all this trouble to keep this ship operational? Kira's eyes narrowed as she considered their predicament. He discovered something valuable, something they wanted buried. This ship, it might be the key to uncovering that truth. Suddenly, a grinding noise came from deeper within the ship. A tremor reverberated through the hull, shaking particles from the ceiling dust. What was that? Kira whispered, grabbing Xiomara's arm and pulling her closer. Their eyes met, both reflecting a shared sense of dread and excitement. They weren't alone in this forgotten vessel. Xiomara swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her datapad. Whatever it is, Shade wouldn't leave anything behind without a purpose. Then we need to follow his trail before whatever that was finds us, Kira muttered, drawing her pulse rifle and edging towards the source of the noise. They moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors, each step accompanied by the rhythmic thrumming emanating from deepest within the ship's bowels. As they rounded a corner, bathed in the flickering glow of emergency lights, they came face to face with a sight that sent chills down their spines. A colossal mechanical arm, its metal joints creaking and groaning, extended from a hidden chamber. A network of glowing wires hummed between sections of it, pulsating with an eerie light. The tremor had subsided, but the air crackled with tension. Xiomara stared at the towering structure, her eyes widening as she processed the sight. Shade. She breathed out his name, a mixture of awe and apprehension coloring her voice. Whatever that eye is, it's part of his puzzle, Kira said, her grip tightening on her pulse rifle. Her gaze scanned the area for any other signs of movement. They had stepped into Shade's world, a chilling blend of technology and mystery, and now they were hunted, not by men with guns, but something far stranger and more dangerous. Kira's breath caught in her throat. Shade called this place a machine heart, said it held the key to understanding the nebula's rhythm. She stepped closer to the mechanical arm, cautious but determined. Her gloved fingers grazed its cold metal surface, tracing patterns etched into its weathered exterior. But if he knew it was dangerous, Xiomara countered, her voice tight with apprehension, why didn't he destroy it? She scanned the control panel near the giant arm, a complex tangle of glowing wires and blinking lights that seemed to pulse in sync with the thrumming they'd heard since entering this section. Maybe we'll find the answer in his notes, Kira said, her gaze fixed on the intricately woven machinery. He always believed there was a way to harness its power, but he never figured out how. Suddenly, the humming intensified. One of the lights on the control panel flared brightly, bathing the chamber in an otherworldly pulsating green. That wasn't here before, Xiomara said, her eyes widening as she watched a section of the giant arm begin to rotate slowly, its movement deliberate and measured. Kira felt a surge of adrenaline. Shade never mentioned anything about it activating. She raised her pulse rifle instinctively. This isn't in any of his journals. A low grinding noise echoed from within the chamber as the mechanical arm stretched further out, its metal joints screeching with each movement. Then, with a final sickening groan, it came to a halt, revealing a shadowed abyss beneath the extended limb. Kira and Xiomara exchanged a look, both sensing the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Whatever lurked in that darkness held Shade captive, or perhaps something even more sinister. "We need to be careful," Kira murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Whatever's down there, it's waiting for us." Xiomara swallowed nervously. "Shade believed in hope," she said, her gaze hardening with resolve. "He wouldn't want us to turn back now." She adjusted the straps on her datapad, its screen flickering with fragments of Shade's cryptic notes. Maybe what he left behind isn't just a machine, maybe it's a weapon. Together, Kira and Xiomara approached the edge of the abyss, their breaths held in anticipation as they peered into the swirling shadows within. They were stepping into unknown territory, a place where technology had fused with something ancient and unknowable. The fate of Shade, and perhaps the future itself, rested on their shoulders. Kira's pulse rifle hummed in her gloved hand, a tiny spark of defiance against the oppressive silence that had swallowed them whole after stepping into this desolate ship. Shade called this place a machine heart, said it held the key to understanding the nebula's rhythm. She circled the colossal mechanical arm, her footsteps echoing softly on the cold metal floor. "But if he knew it was dangerous," came Xiomara's careful reply, her voice tight with apprehension, "why didn't he destroy it?" Kira scanned the control panel flanking the giant arm, a tangled web of glowing wires and blinking lights that seemed to pulse in sync with the thrumming they'd felt since entering this section. "Maybe we'll find the answer in his notes," Kira said, tracing a path of circuits etched into the panel's face with her glove. "He always believed there was a way to harness its power, but he never figured out how." Suddenly, one of the lights on the control panel flared, a piercing green that bathed them both in its eerie glow. Kira's pulse quickened. That wasn't here before," Xiomara breathed, her eyes wide with alarm as a section of the giant arm began to rotate slowly, its movement deliberate and measured. "Shade never mentioned anything about it activating," Kira said, instinctively lifting her rifle. "This isn't in any of his journals." A low grinding noise resonated from within the chamber as the mechanical arm stretched further out, its metal joints screeching with each agonizing movement. Then, with a final sickening groan, it came to a halt, revealing a shadowy abyss beneath the extended limb. It was a gaping maw framed by cold, unforgiving machinery where something immense and unknowable stirred in the depths. Kira and Xiomara exchanged a look, a silent pact forged amidst fear and uncertainty. "We need to be careful," Kira whispered, her voice barely more than a rasp. "Whatever's down there, it's waiting for us." Xiomara swallowed nervously, drawing strength from Shade's memory. "Shade believed in hope," she said, her gaze hardening with resolve. "He wouldn't want us to turn back now." She adjusted the straps on her datapad, its screen flickering with fragments of Shade's cryptic notes. "Maybe what he left behind isn't just a machine. Maybe it's a weapon." Together, Kira and Xiomara approached the edge of the abyss, their breaths held in anticipation as they peered into the swirling shadows within. They were stepping into a territory defined by danger, a place where technology had fused with something ancient and unsettling. The fate of Shade, and perhaps their own survival, hung precariously in the balance. Kira's gloved hand rested on the cold metal surrounding the abyss. "Shade always talked about the nebula's heart beating," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the humming of machinery. "But this feels unnatural." Xiomara crouched beside her, flipping through Shade's crumpled notes. The faint glow from her datapad illuminated worry lines etched on her face. "He also believed in hidden power within technology," she said, tapping on a paragraph scrawled in frantic handwriting. "Maybe he thought he could control it." A low grumble emanated from the shadowy pit, sending a shiver down Kira's spine. She instinctively tightened her grip on her rifle. Control or be controlled? Xiomara's voice shook as she finally looked up, her gaze locked on the churning darkness within the abyss. Did he even understand what lies beneath? A sudden jolt rattled through their feet, accompanied by a blinding flash of green light emanating from the control panel. Electrical sparks crackled across the exposed wires, casting grotesque shadows that danced around them. Kira scrambled back, fear stinging her eyes. "What's happening?" Xiomara cried, scrambling to her knees as the machine began to shudder violently. The mechanical arm, still extended over the abyss, thrashed like a dying beast, its joints screaming in protest. Kira swore she could see figures swirling within the shadows below, their edges blurring and reforming, distorted by the erratic light. "Something's waking," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. The ground buckled beneath them. The control panel sputtered, then fell silent, plunging them into near darkness. A deafening metallic clang echoed as the giant arm finally relinquished its grip, shattering into 1,000 pieces and crashing down into the abyss below with a thunderous roar. An oppressive silence followed, broken only by the ragged breaths of Kira and Xiomara. They stared into the now empty pit, their hearts pounding against their ribs in unison. The machine's wrath had subsided, but something far more terrifying had been unleashed. Kira stumbled back, her pulse rifle raised as a wave of nausea crashed over her. The stench of ozone hung heavy in the air, mixing with something metallic and primal that made her stomach churn. "What did we do?" she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Xiomara scrambled to her feet, her face pale but determined. "Shade believed this machine held the key," she said, holding up his datapad as if it were a lifeline. "He thought it was possible to harness its power, but maybe he underestimated the consequences." Her fingers raked through the tangled wires around a flickering control panel. "There has to be a way to stop this." Kira scanned their grim surroundings. The once pristine chamber felt oppressive now, filled with a suffocating sense of dread. Broken gears whirred and ground against metal, casting long shadows that danced with the intermittent green flashes still emanating from scattered wiring. She took tentative steps forward, her boots crunching on shattered metallic fragments. "We need to get out of here," Kira insisted, trying to quell the tremor in her voice, "before whatever's down there finds a way back up." She saw movement in the abyss below, a dark silhouette shifting against the pulsating green glow. "It's coming," she gasped, raising her rifle again. Xiomara scrambled to meet her gaze, her fingers tracing symbols on the datapad with frantic urgency. "There," she exclaimed, pointing at a faded diagram. "This should shut down the power grid." Kira nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she raced towards it. Sparks crackled around a set of exposed wires, hissing and spitting at them with venomous energy. Xiomara followed close behind, her face illuminated by the eerie glow. "Hurry," she panted, pushing aside tangled cables revealing bare wires. With trembling hands, Kira grabbed the end of a thick cable and clamped down with all her might, snapping it in half. The green lights that had been pulsating within the panel flared violently before dying completely, plunging them into darkness as an earth-shattering groan reverberated through the machine. The air grew silent, except for their ragged breaths and the echo of their own hearts hammering against their ribs. They clung to each other, waiting with bated breath for whatever lurked below. They stared at the black abyss, a maw teeming with unseen possibilities. For now, it was quiet. "Did we do it?" Xiomara whispered, her gaze fixed on the inky blackness. Kira couldn't answer. She didn't know if they had succeeded or merely bought themselves precious time. Whatever lay slumbering within those depths would wait for their chance to awaken again. The fight was far from over. Kira's gloved hand trembled as she pressed her back against the cold, rough metal plating. Her pulse rifle felt heavy in her grasp, a meager shield against the unknown that slumbered below them. "Shade warned us about this place," Kira rasped, her voice tight with tension. "He thought it was dangerous, but I don't think he truly understood." Xiomara knelt beside her, eyes flickering across the chaotic mess of exposed wiring and ruptured circuits. The control panel before them hummed faintly, a sickly green glow pulsing from the mangled wires. "Maybe he was too close," Xiomara murmured, her voice hushed. Maybe we are too close now. A guttural growl echoed up from the abyss, a sound that sent shivers crawling down Kira's spine. The darkness at the base of the shattered machine pulsed with an unnatural light, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the chamber walls. He wouldn't have wanted us to give up, Xiomara said, her gaze hardening. She tapped a sequence onto the datapad, summoning fragmented diagrams and schematics. I think he underestimated how much power this machine could unleash, but if we can figure out its core functions. The growl escalated into a deafening roar that shook their very bones. Kira stumbled back, firing a warning shot into the abyss. The echoing report seemed to enrage the creature below, responding with a flurry of shrieks and scrapes against the unyielding metal floor. A shadow detached itself from the depths, large, hulking, and vaguely humanoid, but its features were twisted and obscured by writhing tendrils of darkness, obscuring any semblance of recognizable shape. Kira gripped her rifle tighter. She had faced many dangers in her life, but nothing like this. This creature felt ancient, malevolent. It belonged to the deepest nightmares she had ever dared imagine. Xiomara held up a hand, frantically flipping through the datapad schematics. I think I found it. A bypass sequence, if we can overload its energy reserves. Her voice was cut off as the creature slammed forward from the abyss, tendrils whipping like flailing serpents, seeking purchase on anything solid. Kira fired again and again, each shot a desperate attempt to buy them time. But the creature seemed impervious, shrugging off the impacts as if they were mere pinpricks. Kira felt a growing sense of panic. They were trapped, cornered by something utterly terrifying in a collapsing machine filled with lethal energy. They had unleashed a nightmare, and now it sought to consume them whole. Xiomara, hurry! She yelled, her voice laced with urgency. Almost there, Xiomara shouted back, sweat streaming down her face as she rapidly tapped commands into the datapad. Kira wrenched up her rifle to blast another volley, a desperate attempt to hold it at bay. But a blinding green explosion erupted from within the machine's core. Metal screeched and groaned as twisted conduits buckled under immense pressure. The creature shrieked in pain, recoiling back into the darkness. The chamber plunged into suffocating blackness. Kira coughed, her ears ringing, struggling to comprehend what had just transpired. She fumbled for Xiomara's hand, seeking reassurance amidst the suffocating silence. Xiomara? She whispered. There was no answer. Kira swore under her breath, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Had their desperate act bought them victory, or sealed their fates? She stumbled forward, driven by primal instinct and the fading hope that Xiomara still clung to life somehow. The darkness swallowed them whole. Kira's fingers tightened around Xiomara's cold hand, feeling for a pulse, for any sign of life. Xiomara? She rasped, her voice echoing hollowly in the darkness. A chilling silence swallowed her words, punctuated only by the distant hiss of cooling metal. She fumbled against the control panel's shattered surface, grasping for something, anything familiar amidst the chaotic jumble of wires and circuitry. If I can just, she muttered to herself, her fingers tracing a faint luminescence emanating from a single intact node. Could this be a beacon? A way out? A low growl vibrated through the floor, sending tremors up her legs. It wasn't the metallic groan of collapsing machinery. This was something predatory, alive and waiting. Whatever had erupted from the abyss, it hadn't been destroyed. It simply bided its time, fueled by a terrifying patience. Kira knew they were on borrowed time. She had to reach that node, decipher its workings, anything before. Kira? A choked voice rasped, thin and desperate. Relief flooded through her like a tidal wave. Xiomara! She scrambled towards the source of the voice, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dying luminescence revealed Xiomara slumped against a wall, her body riddled with deep bleeding punctures. The sight stole Kira's breath, but she forced herself to focus. Can you move? Kira asked, her fingers flying across Xiomara's wounds, desperately searching for anything that could staunch the flow of blood. What? Her voice faltered as she saw Xiomara struggling to breathe, a tremor racking her frail form. Xiomara gasped, clutching at Kira's hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her weakening state. The bypass node worked. A cough racked her whole body, leaving behind a string of painful rasps. But Xiomara's hand went slack. her eyes, wide with unspoken terror, fixed on Kira one last time before glazing over. Kira screamed, the weight of Xiomara's lifeless hand in hers, the silence that descended upon them like a suffocating blanket, all coalesced into a crushing wave of despair. They had escaped the machine's core, only to be trapped by its insidious consequences. She cradled Xiomara's head in her lap, tears hot and bitter on her cheeks. She felt utterly alone, adrift in the vast darkness. Don't give up. Kira whispered against Xiomara's chilled skin, her voice ragged with grief. You never did. Don't leave me now. A soft hum vibrated from the control panel, pulsating with a menacing green light that grew brighter by the second. It was no longer a beacon of hope. It had morphed into a terrifying promise. Whatever lurked within those metallic depths was awake, aware, and coming for her. Kira tightened her grip on Xiomara's hand, her resolve hardening into steel. Grief would come later. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. She would face her fate, whatever it may be, with the memory of Xiomara's courage blazing in her heart. The machine pulsed once more, and then the darkness consumed them whole.